Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to Living the Dream with Curveball, a podcast where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by a special guest, Daralyse Lyons. She is an author, a speaker, and a coach, and we're going to be talking about how she helps people do the things that light them up. We're going to be talking about everything she's been through and even working at a high-powered, high-paying job for 12 years and deciding to leave that. So, Daralyse, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, Curtis, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you and with your listeners, virtually or when they hear this.
Well, why don't you start off by giving everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
Absolutely. So, I really love that this podcast centers around living our dreams. And I'll tell you that I have been a writer since I was 5 years old. I have loved writing. I've loved creativity and self-expression. And I've always believed that stories have the power to transform lives. But that was a dream that I guess I kind of dampened or I pushed down or pushed away or something. And so, as you mentioned, I worked in this high-powered finance job for a while. And I think, for me anyways, trying to escape who I am has never worked. And so I'm very, very grateful that in my 20s, I really got a rude awakening. And I realized, I could either be miserable avoiding doing the things I love, or I could be happy and just succumb to the fact that I'm wired to be a creative. And so that's what I've done. And I've really never looked back. And then also, I'm also biracial. I know with podcasts, people can't see other people. And so years ago, I got very passionately into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And so I do a lot of work there. And it's been such a gift to combine my passions for storytelling and really, amplifying the voices and the stories of others in ways that I think really cause people to listen. So I'm really excited that I get to do work that I love and that I think is useful in society.
Well, let's talk about the company that you work for. What company was it, and what made you decide to leave the company?
Sure, absolutely. So I don't know legally if I'm allowed to talk about exactly what company it is, if, in case people, but I worked for a medical education company first for years. And then I worked for a high-powered hedge fund that has offices in both New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut. And I will say that when I worked in the finance department for the medical education company, I loved the people. I really did. I loved the people that I worked with. I hated the work. I'm just not really wired for finance. My brain doesn't work that way. I was decent at it, but I don't know. I don't love solvable equations. I like living in the question. And so I didn't love the work, but the fact that I was in an uplifting corporate setting and people were kind to me and I felt like I had a lot of kind of creative latitude, I enjoyed that part of it. But I also had an eating disorder. And so I was, and the company that I worked for was very, very supportive. Like I was able to take some leaves from work to go get treatment and things like that. So in many ways, it was a supportive environment to kind of do what I needed to do outside of work, but inside of work, I didn't love the work itself. And then I got this job, which seemed at the time like the dream job, I'm doing like air quotes that no one can see, but it seemed like the dream job, Curtis, because I was making, a lot of money working for the three principal members of this hedge fund. And managing their own personal finances. And so, like it seemed like, oh, cool, I'm making all this money, the company has all these perks, all these benefits. But I hated it. I had to be on from like 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. I had to always be accessible. And I was managing the money of people that had so much money that, one of my bosses spent like $5,000 on suits and, tens of thousands of dollars on bottles of wine. And it just was like, I just couldn't see how I was being in contribution, and the stress of it really exacerbated the eating disorder. And so I was so unhappy. I was so miserable. And I would like to say that, I kind of left because I just realized, I deserved better. But the truth is that my eating disorder just got worse and worse. And so I took a medical leave to deal with that. And at some point in my treatment, I realized, what, I can't go back to finance. If I really want to recover, if I really want to heal, I have to start feeding my soul. And so, that's how I launched into work as a creative and as a writer. It wasn't, I certainly came to it in a way that was like a spectacular failure, but it's turned out to be the best thing that ever happened in my life, was not being able to sustain that pace and not being able to sustain doing something that where I felt like I wasn't in contribution.
Well, since you were in finance, got a couple of finance questions for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
For those who might not know, what is a hedge fund?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So a hedge fund it's basically an investment fund. Like if you've heard of, people tend to be familiar with some of the bigger ones like Vanguard or I think Charles Schwab and stuff has the hedge, like there's different things where you essentially give your money to other people to manage, and then they do your investing for you. Most hedge funds have a certain like minimum amount that you have to buy. You have to kind of like have a certain minimum amount of money that they'll manage for you. And so the hedge fund that I worked at that time, which was maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago now, maybe almost 20 years ago, because I'm 37 now. And so this was in my, I guess maybe it was 10 or 12 years ago now. But their buy-in was $250,000. So you had to essentially have $250,000 or more of money that you gave to this company, where they then manage your investments, and there's shareholders and that kind of thing that govern like how much money you're getting back and all of that. But it's it's essentially investing money for wealthy people and making money for wealthy people. It's it's a lot of privilege upon privilege, actually.
So what advice or good information would you give somebody who is looking to invest in the stock market and they want to start from the ground up and learn?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. So, I managed the money of people who did investments. So I was never on the investment side, but I can say, just in the limited amount of research that I've done and just my own personal kind of investment history, is that it's really, I think really planning for the future is very, very wise. And it's not something, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think they say that most Americans are like only a few paychecks away from, homelessness, from not being able to support their families. Like we don't tend to have a lot of cushion. And I think that's gotten even worse with the pandemic. So one thing that I would say is to really begin to save if you can, and make it automatic. So like having a certain amount of money just come out of your bank account each week or each month or right after each pay period. And it doesn't have to be, a ton of money, but just a percentage of your income just going into savings. And once you build up a little bit of kind of a savings nest egg, where if something happened, your car breaks down, you get an unexpected medical bill, have you're not working for a few weeks or something like that, you've got that savings. And then beyond that, once you've got a little bit of a savings cushion, investing, I go with kind of easy, manageable investments that are a diversified portfolio. So something like investing in the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones index or something like that, which if people aren't familiar with what that is, it's basically just like these stock portfolios that invest money across a wide range of companies. So you're not putting your money in just like one company that may or may not do well. You're putting your money in a number of different companies and it's spread out. And there's a lot of investment companies, smaller investment companies, where you can maybe for like $500 or $1,000, you can start to invest in some of these more diversified portfolios and then have like a little bit, just come out on an automated basis. So I think that is really, probably my level of expertise. I think if someone's like really excited and wants to learn about the stock market, there are so many great courses and great ways to learn, but you have to really, you really have to have your finger on the pulse of these things and really like do research and be passionate about it, I think, to outperform just like, the S&P 500 or something easy. So I go for ease and comfort and something I don't have to think a whole lot about. But if someone's really passionate about it, there are so many really good resources that I think can give people advice. But you don't have to be passionate about it to start somewhere. And I think people can make it very easy for themselves and make it more automatic and, do things so that we're planning for the future, like in terms of retirement and those kinds of things.
So what are some of your biggest failures and successes that you would say during your working time?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think my biggest failure was actually my biggest success. And this is probably going to come across as like an interview answer, right? Like if we were in a job interview and I was like, well, my strengths are my weaknesses or whatever. But no, I think my biggest failure was I did what I was good at. I took the road of least resistance as opposed to really asking myself, is this right for me? Is this the right career for me? Is this what I'm meant to be doing? Is this my calling in the world? And so I think really my biggest failure was settling. And I kind of liken being in a job that you can't really stand to like being in a bad relationship or something, it takes a toll on a person. And so I think for me, that was my biggest failure was really staying in an industry just because it was kind of easy, but I knew the whole time that this isn't what I'm meant to be doing. This isn't who I am. This isn't what I want or where I want my life to be going. And so I think your question was probably looking more for me to kind of point out moments when I did something wrong. But I think the biggest thing I did that didn't serve me was not asking myself the questions, what do I want to do with my life and where are my values? And so I think just really selling out by being in a career that I really didn't want and not doing other side things to bring myself joy or to be in contribution in ways that were meaningful to me or to the communities that I care about. I think I just really settled for a long time, and I paid for that because it was very self-destructive because I was very, very unhappy. And some part of me just knew that, like this is not the life I want to be living at all. And instead of changing my life, I just really, was self-destructive.
So tell us about your book that you wrote and how we can pick it up and what it's about.
Yeah, thank you so much. So actually, I've written and published 22 books now, which seems almost like wild to me when I think about that. But the most recent one is called Demystifying Diversity, Embracing Our Shared Humanity. And it's available anywhere that people buy books. But I think now in pandemic times, it's probably best to order it online. So yeah, demystifying diversity, embracing our shared humanity. And what it is it's based on, I'm actually the co-creator of the podcast, the Demystifying Diversity podcast. And for season 1, I interviewed 128 people about a wide range of topics pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the podcast is, oh my gosh, it's been such a labor of love and so wonderful. And there's so many voices and so many stories in it. And it's really just, I think it really touches people's hearts. But what I realized, Curtis, was that there was a lot of information. There is a lot of information in the podcast, but what's missing was the application piece. And so the book, Demystifying Diversity, Embracing Our Shared Humanity, is kind of meant to take it just from the information and the stories to readers and give them a sense of like, well, okay, so how do you implement this? How do you stretch your heart? How do you kind of work to be a better ally? How do you work to appreciate your culture? How do you work to appreciate the experiences of others that you might perceive to be different than yourself? And there's a workbook that people can buy along with it. And the feedback I've gotten, both from podcast listeners and from readers of the book, is like, oh my gosh, this is so helpful, because I think right now there are a lot of people out there who want to kind of be better relatives to each other and want to embrace other humans, and don't always really know where to begin or what kind of work to do. And so I think a lot of what I try to do is give people resources and tangible tools and encourage them to really live up to their own values. I mean, I think it ties back a little bit to your question of what my biggest failure was. And I think the times that have been the most painful in my life internally have been times when I wasn't living up to my own values, and the times that have been the most healing and restorative, regardless of external circumstances, have been the times when I've really been the person that I'm called to be. And so I think the book, and to a certain degree, the podcast kind of equip people to really look inward and figure out, who do I want to be within myself? Who do I want to be with the people around me? How can I participate more in this world in ways that bring people together, in love and in empathy?
Are there any upcoming projects or speaking engagements that you're working on right now that people need to know about?
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much. So I always have a number of upcoming projects. I'm working on a young adult novel. I'm actually I'm moderating a panel for the NLGJA convention. And I think it's okay to talk about, I'll be doing a TED Talk in September. So that's exciting. And yeah, I mean, just a lot of good and fun and exciting things. And I'm always really grateful that there seems to be a need for this work. So there seems to be a demand for it, and it's wonderful that I get to answer that.
So tell us about the NLGJA panel.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what it is it's a convention of journalists, primarily in the LGBTQ community, but it's open to allies and other folks as well. And I'm doing a panel that pertains to diversity and inclusion and reporting, and, and how to really, I think one of the things that can be challenging in journalism is many of us journalists were taught that we need to report both sides of the issue, like that in order to be fair and in order to be ethical, we have to present both sides of an equation, both sides of an issue. But I think the problem with that is that sometimes, and we saw this a lot, with the Trump administration and different things, and regardless of people's politics, we just kind of saw a lot of, I think, divisive reporting, right? And a lot of kind of efforts to present both sides in ways that ended up being inflammatory. And so the panel is going to look at, well, what are the ethical obligations of journalists, and and the moments when really the kind thing to do, the healthy thing to do is just present the truth and present what's right, and not, kind of to leave out of the conversation in certain moments and certain circumstances, to leave out, bigotry and hatred. And I think that's a really exciting move in the field of journalism. And to be part of that, I think is really, for me, interesting and fun and innovative, because it's very different, but I think it is very much more ethical than forms of journalism that would think that, oh, well, you have to present the side of the person who's committing hate crimes or something, be ethical. And so this is just looking at is that really true, and how can we be ethical as journalists?
Well, how do people connect with you so we can keep up with you? Give out websites, social media links?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I love connecting with people. So 2 ways, I would say, go to daralyse.com. That's DARALYSELYONS.com. And people can connect with me there. They can send me private messages. They can look at all the books I've written and read articles and all of that jazz. Or if you are interested in exploring subjects of diversity, go to demystifyingdiversitypodcast.com. And there's links to all the episodes. It's also, the podcast is available anywhere people get their podcasts. They can also send messages to me, and all the social media handles. I'm on all the social media, so people can connect through either website to Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and and all of that.
Do you have any final thoughts on diversity and inclusion, or anything that you would like to say before we close out?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I could talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion for days. So let me just see. I guess one thing that I think is really, really important, and the more that I do this work, the more I recognize it being so, so important, is self-awareness and appreciation for the past, and really sort of self-education. So I would say that for people listening, an invitation that I might throw out there is to really think about, what are all the things that make you the person you are today? What are the influences? What are the, thought patterns? What are the communities? What are the family stories? Where were your ancestors? And just really kind of thinking about all of the things that go into who you are in this present moment. And then asking yourself, am I on a path that is the path that I really want to be on, the path that really serves people, the path that's really, kind, that's really in keeping with my values? And if you are on that path, great. How do you kind of stay on that path and shore up and keep doing the things that you're doing? And if you're not on that path, invite yourself to do some work to get on a different path, or to slightly course correct. And I think, most of us know deep down within ourselves if we're honoring our values. But I think it's important first to think about, well, where do those values come from and what are they shaped by? Because sometimes, my experience of working with people is that they can think that a thought or a value is their own. And then as they trace it back, they realize oh no, this actually comes from, old messages or toxic beliefs or, abuse, whatever. So yeah, get clear on who you are and get clear on who you want to be, and do what you can to kind of bridge that divide if there is one.
Ladies and gentlemen, daralyse.com. Daralyse, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Curtis, for having me. It was really great to talk to you.
And listeners, please be sure to follow, rate, review, and share after listening. And for you Android listeners, go to the Google Play Store, type in Living the Dream with Curveball, and download the podcast app. For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused, on Living the Dream.